What happens when two children from different sides of the galactic tracks grow up together as best friends, both join the Academy to join the Empire, but then one joins the Rebel Alliance? What would it be like to be a Star Wars Imperial officer, growing up believing that your Empire is the only way to bring stability and peace to the galaxy, and then watch Alderaan be destroyed? And can you have a Star Wars romance that doesn't include the words, I know? Riki and I talk about all that as we explore the Claudia Gray Star Wars novel, Lost Stars. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm your host. As we're doing these days during the strike, we are talking about Star Wars media and Star Wars related media, but not the actual on-screen content. And a lot of that is some of the great books. And Riki Hayashi, who's been a regular co-host and guest on this podcast, recently told me that he was reading one of my absolute favorite of the Star Wars books, Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. So, Riki, I'm so glad we could have you on here. And let's just jump right in by saying, what was it you loved about this book that made you want to say, hey, we should be talking about this?
You talked about all that other stuff, Matthew, and then the very last thing I think you said was a romance.
Yep.
And that's what I'm here for. I wouldn't even call it a guilty pleasure because that implies that I don't enjoy it or that I try to hide it. Mm-hmm. I just love romance, like rom-coms, when they are done well. I think rom-coms get maligned because so many of them are bad. But a well-done romance, I am totally here for it. And this is a well-done romance. It is a well-done Star Wars novel. We talked about Bloodline earlier this year, and I'm stunned. I think I need to now go read some other Claudia Gray things. I think she's done one more Star Wars novel, but she's written a heck of a lot of other things, right?
She's actually done a total of, I believe, 5 that have been published, and a number of the other ones, they've all tied into things we've read. Claudia Gray has written Lost Stars, Bloodline, which Riki and I have also talked about, Leia, Princess of Alderaan, which sets up a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, Master and Apprentice, which is a great book about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan early in their adventures, and then also the High Republic book, Into the Dark, The Fallen Star. She likes talking about stars that do bad things. And then Star Wars The High Republic Adventures Quest of the Jedi, which is a comic book. So, which I believe is not yet published this year or maybe published soon. So yeah, she's been a very prolific author. And I think there's a lot of her great stuff to read. And I think this is one of her best. And I agree with you. There's so much there is a lot of the other stuff that I love, especially the moral questions and the world building. But this was one of the first Star Wars novels that I read, and it really grabbed me, I think in part because the romance was written so well. And I'm like you, I love romances. I love rom-coms. I think this is something different, which I also love, which is the kind of star-crossed lovers story, the often a romantic tragedy or will romance survive? And I agree with you that I think sometimes one of the reasons why they're denigrated is that sometimes they're not great. I also think there's an awful lot of misogyny that goes into it in terms of romance is seen as the chick lit kind of side of things and stuff like that. And I think it's really awesome that romance, I think there's been a lot of stuff about how rom-coms are getting more attention, romance is getting more attention, romance novels are getting more attention, both the Bodice River kind and the non-Bodice River kind. And I don't know too much about the legacy parts of the universe, of the extended universe legacy stuff. My understanding, though, is that very little of it was written by women, and that because it was thought to be an audience mostly to young boys and young men, romance plots were often sidelined or often weren't well done. Some people are going to yell at me about Luke and Mara Jade, and that's fine. Maybe there's some good stuff in there. But a lot of the stuff I've read from that era, the women were terribly written, and I think this book just felt like such a fresh breath of fresh air to me because the women characters are so much better, and the romance was done. I was rooting for them, and there were scenes the romantic tension building, will they kiss, and when they do, the sexual tension, the romantic tension. It was so good.
Yeah, Luke and Mara Jade. I don't even remember the romance. They get married in Legends. but I don't really remember the romance. I think it was just presented as like they are two Jedi, and at the time Mara Jade was on the dark side. So it was like this, kind of the battling Jedi fall in love type of thing through combat and then through understanding and reconciliation. But the writing for it was never really memorable.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that, I think like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Clone Wars is just better.
Yeah.
From a romance standpoint. Whether you're talking about the Duchess Satine or kind of flirting with Asajj Ventress, right?
I was going to say
time.
I was going to say Darth Maul. I think Obi-Wan's kind of a slut in the universe, which I say is a very positive term, especially if you read Master and Apprentice and some of his other books. But yeah, no, I agree with you there that there's been some fun flirting on screen, but not much in the earlier books. And yeah, I think it's part of what I love about this one so much.
And the thing about this novel is that this is a young adult novel. Mm-hmm. Right? That's my understanding, is that that's what the target audience is. And I don't really know what that means anymore. Yeah. But the two main characters. So let's talk about that. The two main characters are Sienna. Oh, sorry.
Even before that, why don't we do a quick plot summary? Just because I think some people have read the book, a lot of people won't have. And I'll just also say, I heard that it was YA after I'd read the book. I would have not thought that while reading it.
It's 500 pages.
I grew up in the days of Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, and like, to me, so YA I think has advanced a lot more since those days. So the book starts on this very out of the way planet called Jellicon, where it is 8 years after the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire, basically 8 years after Revenge of the Sith, the movie, and this planet is now being brought into the Empire, and to a lot of the kids at that time, this is the most, and to a lot of the parents, this is great because their planet has had warfare, it's had incredible lack of resources, it's had fighting between these two different groups of colonists who arrived at different times. And, as I've said before on this and other podcasts, part of the reason why people turn to authoritarians, Mussolini made the trains run on time. After long periods of chaos, which the Clone Wars and their aftermath were, people are really drawn to order. And the Empire arrives, and it's all this glory and wonder, and these two young kids especially, who are from the two different sides of the tracks. One lives down in the valley. They're the poor, kind of very traditional, very honor-based, and then the newer people who are richer, they live up on the mountains. One kid from each of those groups is both super, super excited about the chance to see the Imperial ships and to get to learn more about them. And the girl from down in the valley, her name is Sienna Rey, and then his name is Thane. His name is Thane. Riki's going to tell me in a second what his full name is, because his full name is awesome. I just remembered his first name being Thane.
Oh, Thane Kyrell.
Thane Kyrell, great name. Basically, he's from the kind of older, the more aristocrat groups, more recent immigrants. He sees her getting teased because she knows so much about the ships, which he recognizes. He comes to her defense. They're about to get beaten up by these group of kids when who comes to their rescue? Grand Moff Tarkin, who's kind of wandering around, sees it happen because he's the Imperial representative. There's a great kind of back and forth where you see that, like, he was a very charming man, like evil and terrible, but he would have a very high charisma score, the way a lot of villains probably do. And he kind of like plants this idea, he kind of like rewards their strategic thinking for how they kind of had this fight as well as their honor, and says, you two should join the Empire. You should be pilots. You could really go far. And so the two of them spend most of their childhood training to be pilots, getting ready for it, helping each other with school, learning a bit about each other, because I said they're from the opposite sides of the track kind of a thing. Growing up, and then at 16, both together, getting to go to the highest Imperial Academy in the world, in the galaxy, which is the one in Coruscant. They arrive there, they have a lot of adventures. There are some moments that kind of pull them apart and then kind of put them back together, one of which really involves coming to realize that Thane has a much higher level of distrust of authority. And there's an incident where he thinks that the people running the academy are kind of screwing the two of them to try and divide them. She can't really believe the idea that the Empire would ever do something like that. He thinks it's possible. And that kind of sets up the somewhat different tracks they're both going on, because he's still very much in the Empire, but he's starting to have doubts. He's starting to become more cynical. For him, it's the Empire is about opportunity, whereas for her, it's really about honor. It's about duty. It's about making the galaxy a better place. As they're coming up, they graduate. They both go into Imperial Fleet, and they come to realize that they have these romantic feelings for each other. Again, like, the romantic tension is beautifully done. There's lots of scenes of both of them misinterpret each other, and they're not sure if the other likes them or what's going to happen. And finally, they get together. They have their first kiss, and it's wonderfully done. And circumstances start to divide them, especially as the rebellion starts to grow. And as the rebellion gets worse and worse, as the rebellion starts to fight back more and more, she is just not able to see them as anything but terrorists. He mostly sees them as terrorists, but also starts to have a bit of sympathy for them. For the idea of the Empire isn't that great either. Up until the moment of the first Star Wars movie, the Battle of Yavin, and they are each basically either directly witnessing or very closely witnessing the aftermath of the destruction of the first Death Star. First of the destruction of Alderaan, and then the destruction of the first Death Star. They're both horribly shaken by this. For her, though, she comes to believe that, as horrible as it was to destroy Alderaan, that it had to be done as a way of saying, look, if we do this one terrible thing, hopefully it'll stop all the rebellion and thus save far more lives in the years to come. And I'll say, reading that, I never had quite associated. The first time I read it, I had not directly connected that to the American justification for dropping nuclear bombs on Japan, but most recently, having thought about that a lot because of Oppenheimer and the Gojira movies I've been watching, that connection was very much in my head. She's able to justify that, especially because she kind of sees but they blew up the Death Star, in which a lot of people, including some of her best friends, were killed. He, though, starts to really wrestle with it. After the Battle of Hoth, he comes into contact with Wedge and Antilles. A lot of your favorite characters pop up in some version or the other. He winds up joining the rebellion, and then you get to see the wars going forward through both of their eyes. And it's actually at the Battle of Hoth that she realizes that he has switched sides. He switched sides before that. And they keep having these moments of almost getting together and then being pulled apart again. He actually deserts before he's ready to join the rebellion. She goes to find him, thinking she might arrest him, thinking she might try to talk him back in. They wind up making love for the first time in a sort of we're so far apart, but we're so close together moment. And then she decides to basically fake his suicide to help cover for him so that he can basically desert. And it's the first lie she's ever told. She comes from a culture where honor is very, very important. And she feels so bad about this, and especially when she realizes he's joined the rebellion, she promises she's never going to do it again. They have more adventures through the course of the war. They keep trying to almost get back together, but they quite can't. They never can quite see it from each other's eyes. And so finally, we get to the Battle of Endor. More terrible things happen. And finally, we cut to some of the battles that happen later. If you've read the Aftermath books or heard them referred to, the Battle of Jeddah. The Battle of Jeddah is kind of the last climactic battle during which the Empire.
Battle of Jakku.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I confused those two. The Battle of Jakku. Thank you. If you ever wondered why was there a crashed Star Destroyer on the surface of Jakku that Rey could kind of go scavenging, here's your answer. During the course of this battle, she's been given command of Star Destroyer. Thane leads a group of troops to try and take over the Star Destroyer. She decides that the only thing she can do is to crash the Star Destroyer into the planet. He tries to talk her out of this and then tries to rescue her. They have this moment where they angry at each other, but they love each other, and they're both going to die. And finally, he manages to get her off the ship. And in a move that I thought was really kind of beautifully done, it doesn't end with, everything being okay. She doesn't join the rebellion at the end. She's come to understand how much the Empire abandoned her, and that she was wrong many steps of the way, and that the Empire was wrong. but she kind of regrets a lot of that. But we end with Thane visiting her in prison when she's about to go on trial for war crimes. And it sounds like Thane is going to be able to make her get a good deal. And the hope certainly is that they're going to be able to be together going forward. But that's their last scene together. And then it ends with one of the other characters, Nash, talking to some people about this new secret Imperial fleet that's starting to form way deep in the nebulas in the Outer Rim, which we know to be eventually become the First Order.
Oh, is that where he's going? Okay. That probably makes more sense. I thought he was going to Exegol for some reason. But no, that's probably correct.
Yeah. In the Aftermath books, they sketch out that like there's a bunch of groups waiting in various parts that will much later get called to Exegol.
Okay. Yeah, Exegol is kind of a mess because I've also read that the Sith acolytes like literally use dark side magic to just like conjure the ships up. So yeah, actually like shipyards.
So this was written, and I'll say this book was written fairly early in the Disney era. I believe it was before Rogue One, because the events it talks about, like she's on the ship that helps capture Princess Leia's ship, and the way it's written sounds very much like the author had not yet seen Rogue One, and so like Star Wars, for the most part, has been doing a very good job, for the most part, of keeping solid canonicity across things. But where books line up with movies and with other books, it isn't always the perfect. So there's certainly some stuff about the way some of these stories play out that doesn't quite fit, but it's close enough that I think it's pretty easy to kind of hand wave and be fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that she doesn't mention the Battle of Scarif at all, which the Devastator, Vader's flagship, does show up at the very end. Right. And then from there, they pursue the Tantive 4 to Tatooine. Right.
So I think you wanted to talk about the two main characters as a place to start. So let's do that.
Yeah, first off, Thane Kyrell is the most epic name of all time. Mm-hmm. Like, Star Wars has a lot of interesting names. You know, the whole idea of, like, Skywalker. This one we have Nash Windrider, right? Like, these types of names are very common in Star Wars. And then you get the completely out there names, like Sheev, Palpatine. But Thane Kyrell, like, that's a name you can really bite into and would, like, fit into many other sci-fi or possibly even real-world franchises. I just love it as a name. Yeah. Sienna, I wasn't quite as on board. Like, there's nothing wrong with it, but I just love reading and or saying the name Thane Kyrell.
It sounds like someone has used that name in a D&D campaign. Like, definitely has that kind of, like, a little bit on the edge of fantasy. Yeah, sure. You should do it. He's a great character.
Yeah, and then the romance part, like I said, this is a young adult novel, and I haven't really read much young adult, being so far removed from that age. So maybe I had a misconception or a misremembering of what that kind of novel is. But I don't understand, like, what makes this young adult. Like, I thought it was just a fine nonovel, quite frankly.
I mean, like I said, my understanding is that YA has aged up quite I should better phrase that. It's not that YA has aged up. It's still supposed to be the same age ranges. It's that I think that the content that is deemed acceptable for teenagers is significantly more advanced than it was in my childhood, and that's probably in your childhood.
That's fair, yeah.
But I really appreciate, I really liked the way that the romance played out, and also the sexuality of it, in that, I mean, there's nothing like, there's no smut in the book by any means, but there's obviously some moments of eroticism and of clearly what it's talking about is a sense that I think a lot of us can probably identify with, where you love someone like crazy, you're also fighting with them like crazy, and there's an extent to which there's a desire to physically connect with them, to intimately connect with them in a way to kind of like shut out all the things you're fighting about. And that sometimes that can be healing in a way, and sometimes it can be kind of like the death knell of, like, we're doing this to kind of try and sweep the problems under the rug. And, like, I mean, I could get in all sorts of level of, like, romance counseling here about toxicity or healthiness, but I haven't often seen books, and especially now in the Star Wars universe, that really deal with that level of, like, having this very strong, intimate, loving connection with someone and wanting to physically express this, almost as kind of a result, there's a way of like getting away from these fundamental conflicts you're having.
Yeah, it's fairly unique in Star Wars. Like, we mentioned the whole Luke and Mara thing, and that just never felt like a good romance. It felt almost fated, like, because in that era of novels, they did introduce like a new Force-sensitive woman in like every new different series or book, and then like her and Luke would have a flirtation, and then most of them would like leave because they like touched the dark side and couldn't deal with it and had to get out or die or whatever. And then Mara was the only one who came back because Timothy Zahn was so popular and he got more novels. So that, I mean, he's the one who created her. So that's kind of why I feel like he ended up with Mara.
That makes sense.
That whole era just had like none of those Luke plus X romances felt good or like well written. And then of course the other thing we have is Han and Leia, which was already kind of settled by the time we get to those Legends novels. So we didn't really get the romance per se. We just kind of got them in married life.
Some of my favorite of those books, I think I'll call it the Legacy canon, the Legends canon, obviously, are the Darth Bane books, which are, for the most part, I think very good books. They go really into the history and the ideology and the philosophy of the Sith and answer a lot of questions about the rule of two. Every woman in it, though, especially every woman Jedi, a Force user, is a femme fatale who's written in this very purple language. They never walk into a room. They I don't think they sashay, but like they use other words like that. It's always about their body type and their sexuality and how they use it to weave spells of power over unsuspecting men and things like that. And it's just like, that can be fun and that can be fine in a book, but it felt very much like a man writing a woman character. And some men have written great women characters, but it can go very badly, and I felt like this hit a lot of that. So yeah, I think just these books were just, it was just a really nice change for that. And I think the idea of having two characters who are on two different sides is very interesting, but often it's told as like brothers or siblings or father and son. And so I thought this was also a really nice change to make it about these kids who grew up with the same ideals and then go in such different directions.
And to have them be present at all of these pivotal moments, like Yavin, Hoth, Endor, so that's like original trilogy, like 3 focal battles. And then Jakku, which is the pivotal battle and the whole aftermath post Return of the Jedi novels, where even the Empire finally failed. Like, that's where the Empire falls, I believe, is the Battle of Jakku.
Yeah, and like, there are times where I feel it feels a little bit on the nose that they're in so many of these poems, but it is fun to see those things from other sides. So, for example, she controls the she's the one who like controls the not gravity well, what's the name of it? The tractor beam that catches Princess Leia's ship at the beginning. And then she's part of the group that goes to rescue Darth Vader after he's been sent off hurtling at the end of Death Star. And like later, both Thane is part of the group that discovers the Imperial fleet massing somewhere far away from where the Death Star is. And so they're involved in all these little moments.
Yes, so Thane, he gets, after Alderaan, Thane gets sent to Dantooine. He's part of a scouting group that goes to Dantooine, which is the fake or old rebel base that Leia gives up in the interrogation.
Yeah.
And I just, like, those are the kinds of Easter eggs that really make me happy in Star Wars, because like that exists. She named Dantooine, and they're like, it's too far for a demonstration, but obviously they're still going to send some ships out there to check it out. And like, who went out there? Well, Thane went out there.
Yeah.
Or I believe Sienna at Cloud City, she and her crew are the ones who disable the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive.
Yep.
Initially. And so when Vader speaks to Admiral Piet and says, have your men disabled the hyperdrive on the ship? That's her. She did that.
Yeah.
And there's a moment when the Falcon hyperdrives away, where she's like, "Oh, I'm dead."
Yep. Yeah, so she gets to witness that moment where we all expect Vader to kill Admiral Piet, and he doesn't. She's one of the part of the crew who gets to be there.
Yeah.
So it's very, like, in a way, they're kind of like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the Star Wars original trilogy movies.
Yes.
Like, they get to see all this. So
because they're there at all the pivotal moments and do like one of the things that is mentioned.
Right. Exactly. So let's talk about each of the characters individually, because I think that it's the romance is great, but also I do think there's something so powerful about seeing this idea of like the star-crossed lovers, but also the idea of the people on two different sides. And I want to start with her character, because I do think there has been, particularly with stuff like Andor, but also some of the other things we've seen, Rebels did a little bit of this. There's been this movement towards humanizing and giving us a human face, at least, of the people who are in the Empire, and that we started out in the 1970s with just, they're all jackbooted, white armored, faceless goons with, English accented, white male officers who are just doing terrible things, all the way to we're rooting for a romance for a girl who's justifying the destruction of Alderaan. What did you think of her character and how she was portrayed?
Didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't like that part. I think it's fine to write characters that make these arguments, because you want to know, like, the audience wants to know why people stay with the Empire. Why do they continue to do these things? So someone has to voice it. And it's really more her best friend from the Academy, Jude, who initially, like, plants this idea in her head. Right. And then Jude is on the Death Star 1, when it gets destroyed. So she dies. So I think for Sienna, it is as much like, well, Jude made this interesting logical argument and then died. Like, now I'm pissed. So I think that's what motivates her more than, like, the logic of the argument, is that she's really upset that her best friend died. Yeah. Which is, I find that more understandable. Like, I just really don't like the argument, and maybe, like, this is part of me being Japanese. You mentioned that it's a parallel. Alderaan is a parallel to the atomic bombs. Of the part of the justification was to make Japan surrender so that they didn't have to send troops in, and, like, it would cost us hundreds of thousands of lives and troops to invade Japan. So, yeah, maybe in that sense, it upsets me a little, the justification of civilian, in my mind, terrorism. Yeah. To end a war, or in this case, to stop a war. The other character that's interesting here is Nash. Nash Windrider is from Alderaan, right? And he's another... They're all Imperial cadets who become officers. And he... I don't know, like, he takes a dark turn. Yeah. And so I think he is also used as a way to soften Sienna, in a way. Like, they're both, like, fully on board, like, yeah, Alderaan is fine, like, that Empire should have done that. But he, because I think of his heritage being from Alderaan, takes it to a much darker place, maybe to justify to the Empire that he can continue to exist. Like, hey, I'm not like them, those Organa traitors, like, I'm fully on board. I hate those people, I hate myself, I hate Alderaan. Like, that's how he really acts.
And I think it's very intentional, especially because at the end, Sienna is saying, like, one of the things we learn about her is that her honor is so important to her. And I'll say a bit more specifically about that in a bit, but that even with that she does feel like at the end, she's willing to say the Empire was wrong and to, in her mind, like, be a part of this new republic in whatever way she can, even though she's not going to, like, officially, like, like, join the rebellion or anything like that. Whereas Nash, like I said, he's still part of whatever the rump of the Empire is going to be. And I think you got it exactly right. I think the character Jude, who comes up with that, she is presented as, I think, a very, like, numbers and logic before emotion character. And I think she reminds me a lot of Entrapta, for anyone who's seen She-Ra. And somewhat maybe autistic coded, I think not too clearly, and I don't ever want to kind of put something like that.
I think it's, I don't know. I thought she was. So
I think definitely the coding is there. I think, I think it's too easy to just say they are this when we're talking about a world that is just completely different and we don't know.
sure.
But yeah, I think she's very coded that way. I think you're correct. I'm probably underselling that. And so when she comes up for this justification, to me, it's that I think you're right. It's not that I think that convinces her. It's that I think it gives her a justification. It gives her an excuse because she's caught in this horrible situation where her entire life has been built around the idea that the Empire is noble and worthy and good. And she is truly horrified to watch the destruction of this planet. And she can't she can't square the circle. And the justification gives her a way to square the circle so that she doesn't have to challenge her core belief.
Yeah, and to be clear to everyone, the justification in the novel is that, Alderaan obviously had much of the leadership of the rebellion. Like, they knew at this point that Leia and Bail were traitors.
Right.
And they believed that there was a large network of traitors on Alderaan supporting them. Basically, like, not the whole planet, right? But
yeah.
But the planet was essentially in rebellion in the Empire's mind. And this is, I'm saying this from their perspective. And by destroying Alderaan with the Death Star and showing this power, it would show the rest of the rebellion that there's no point in fighting. You can't fight against this. So they were preventing a larger conflict, a larger war from even starting, from taking place.
Right.
And I mean, if you think about that from like any kind of actual like human emotional perspective, like we've talked about this in the past, that the destruction of Alderaan was a catalyzing moment for the galaxy where other planets said, whoa, that's not cool. You can't do that. And what's to stop them from doing that to us? Like, we have some rebels on this planet. Not all of us are, but like, are they going to blow us up next? And so I don't know. That's why I don't like the argument, because I think the counter argument of Alderaan catalyzing the rebellion makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But and maybe it's a case, like you said, like the shock of it in the moment. Like, Ju dies like not a day after saying this to Sienna. So maybe with more time, she would have come around to a different perspective. So her, like, not just the anger of Jude dying, but I think her opinion being frozen in time by her death is what really like sticks for Sienna.
Yeah, she can't argue it with her, and as I'll talk about in a minute, betrayal is so verboten for her.
Yeah,
and it would be betraying her friend's memory, And
she tries to talk with Thane about it, but after this point, he leaves. He deserts, and so the only person she has to talk to about it is Nash, and he's just kind of gone off the deep end.
And I think one thing that's really powerful is, and this is where I think we see her journey in a way that Nash doesn't do, is that part of her commitment to that is that by the time of Empire and the fighting continuing and getting even worse, she firmly believes that the Empire tried this tactic.
Yeah.
It was proven to be wrong, and so that the Empire would never do it again. And that it is when she learns about the construction of the second Death Star, a real break occurs for her, and we get some great mental insights into her, where she says that I no longer believe in the Empire. She says that she'll probably leave when her commission is up, but that she cannot break her promise. And now she feels that like when she's fighting, because she has some leadership roles still, she's fighting to protect her fellow soldiers. She's not fighting for the Emperor anymore. But she still can't bring herself. And this is a quote that I want to read because I think it is so powerful and says so much about part of why I love this book so much is not only does this help me understand why people would stay in the Empire, but it is so relatable because I think we see these same dynamics in our own world all the time. And what she said is, this is coming from her point of view, while she would never, and this is soon after she's realized that they have built the second Death Star. However, while she would never contemplate joining the rebels herself, she now understood how Thane could have done so. Quote, thinking to herself, "This isn't about whether or not we've kept faith with the Empire," Thane had said to her as he held her close in the fortress. "It's about whether the Empire has kept faith with us." And that's his argument, is that like the agreement we had with the Empire has dissolved because they lied to us. They broke faith with us. But for her, And her thought continues, an oath of loyalty remained binding even when the subject proved unworthy. It simply became more bitter. And like I said, all the stuff that I read about this, I kept thinking about people who will stay utterly dedicated to a political or religious or like any kind of, it could be like a political belief, or it could be like, no, this was the best pitcher for the Mets for this year, when all the statistics, all the data, all the arguments are going against them, and they just cannot accept that they are wrong, and so they'll keep squaring circles and finding justifications. And I think that all relates to our world very much, clearly on one particular side. I think it can be found in almost any direction. But then this line, when I read this line, I've been a marital counselor for quite some time. I've been married and divorced. And what I heard in this line is the horrible and I think abusive advice that churches and conservatives so often give to people, especially women, about you need to stay in a marriage even if your partner is abusing you or is otherwise breaking your vows. This idea that even if they are not worthy of you, even if they are not worthy of the vow that you have made to them, that you still must honor the vow you made. And knowing Claudia Gray, I think there was some intentionality behind it, because these are issues she really cares about. And there's just something so heartbreakingly sad about her perspective of, even though the empire is this horrible thing, I made a promise to stay with them, and so I have to honor that promise. And it's romantic, and it's sad, and it's tragic, but it's also like she allows herself to blind herself to the fact that by doing that, she's continuing to help the empire kill more people. And I kind of want to shake her or yell at her for that, and it's to me, it's what makes her such an interesting character, is that she's not just the perfect, oh, how sad that she got misled. She digs in her heels even when she knows that's wrong. And it makes me hate her, and it makes me love her as a character, and it makes me just want to turn every page and read more.
Yeah, Sienna is strongly driven by loyalty and honor, as you've said. And then Thane, I would say he's driven by justice.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he sees the destruction of Alderaan, and then right after, like I said, that he gets sent to Dantooine. And I believe, like, is it on that planet where he sees the Empire mistreating slaves, or just like having slave labor? And he's like, what the heck? Like, we're not supposed to be doing that. So those are like the two breaking point incidents for him. And he decides, as he expresses to Sienna, like, that the Empire is not worthy of his loyalty because they are committing injustices. Yeah.
And I think in the end, like, for me as the audience, it is pretty clear, I think, that he's right and she's wrong in that kind of idea. But it's done in that way, or especially when having met them as little kids, where I can't agree with what she's doing, but I 100% believe that that's what the character would think was right. Because of how she's raised and because of everything she's been taught.
And I think it's fine for a character like Sienna to go through this, as you said. Like, we hate her for it when she's justifying it this way, and then when she comes around at the end, we love her. Or when Thane expresses love, we love her. Like, I think it's very well written in that way, that we can go on this journey with them. Obviously, like, if you take snapshots of her character at certain points, it's like, well, she's terrible.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of journey that makes it worth going on with a character.
Yeah, for sure. And it just makes it so much more interesting than, a mustache-twirling villain can be fun, just, to have the person to hate or the person to be afraid of, or the person to laugh at, whatever it is. But to me, like I said, this book feels very much the same kind of spirit as Andor. It's been out long enough that I don't mind too many spoilers, but I'll try to be a little bit vague about this here. In Andor, we get introduced to two different Imperial characters who are both pretty terrible, but are also, like, things happen that make us sympathetic to them in ways. And I think they're not the same as what happens with Sienna, because she is a very much more relatable and sympathetic character and becomes, like I said, someone we're rooting for at various points in time. But I think it's all the same idea of let's break down this idea of good guys and bad guys, and actually really trouble it somewhat.
Yeah, I think Andor is a good comparison. Also because of the way that these characters are new characters, and like everything is happening in the background of the main story, right? Like we talked about how it hits the inflection points of the original trilogy, and yet I think Sienna meets Tarkin a couple of times. Well, they both meet him at the beginning, but he meets her again as an officer. Thane is recruited by Wedge, and maybe talks to like one of the generals.
Yep.
In one of the scenes. But there's never like this moment where like, oh, like now you're buddies with Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and you're in the main cast. Like, no, they never are.
Yeah.
They're always background characters, and yet it's compelling. And I think it adds so much in the same way that Andor is adding to this pre-rebellion period of like, oh, okay, like all this all makes sense.
Yeah, in some ways, the way that Tarkin remembers them, it's not played out as though like he's their best friend. It's more just like, this is again a sign of why he was such a good officer and why he would instill such incredible loyalty in the people who worked for him. And part of it was fear, to be sure. But part of it was, I think, like when they've run into him later, they have to like remind him, they have to give him like a little bit more search text for the search box, They'd say like, hey, remember you met us when we were kids. And then he's like, oh yes, of course. And he's friendly towards them and he's supportive towards them. And it's like, well, you're clearly, he makes a joke about how I must be much better at Imperial recruiting than I thought I would be. And you can just like, you read that and I want to die for Tarkin. I want to be like, oh my God, what a great leader you are. And then immediately like, no, wait, that's horrible. You're terrible. But I just love things like that because it gives us a little more of Wedge's story. It gives us a little more background of what's going on Hoth and reminds us that actually, while Han and Luke and all of our heroes were all going off to Dagobah and Bespin and then to Tatooine to try to free him from Carbonite and all that more battles were happening. And like they just make these references to like battles that keep happening, that the war keeps growing and growing in ways that we never got to see on screen, but make sense and remind us like the war wasn't just happening when Luke or Han or Leia was on screen.
Yeah. Tarkin doesn't get a lot of, I guess we'll call it page time, as it were. Mm-hmm. But he is absolutely devastatingly effective at this in a way. It's comical when leaders are bad at this, where they get people's names wrong or like don't even bother. And like in Star Wars, I suppose, like call them like TK1487 or whatever. Right. But Tarkin remembers details. Like as soon as they jog he or she, I think at that point, only her, jogs his memory. He's like, yes, Jellicon, like blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And like remembers small details of their encounter. It's like, oh yeah, exactly. Like as you said, that's how a good leader, and unfortunately Tarkin's a good leader, inspires people to want to perform well for them to get more of his attention and to advance. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I also just like how, like I said, there's a couple like minute details that people can quibble about, but in terms of tone, I just feel like it fits in so well with what Bad Batch has done, even what Solo has done, even though that's not my favorite Star Wars movie. I have always been fascinated by this period between the Clone Wars and the original trilogy, and I feel like we're just doing so much more to fill in that gap of what was happening in those years and why did the Empire have such success? Because I think part of the point of A New Hope is that the Empire has been able to rule up till now through a combination of fear and loyalty. And it's because that's starting to wear off, that in part because memories of the Clone Wars are fading enough, that people are starting to rebel. But here, just those opening scenes of seeing why these two kids are like, you said Thane is very focused on justice. I think you're right. He comes to help this girl who's not from like his group against people from his group because he doesn't like bullies. Like it's a very like Captain America kind of moment. And I think that's why he joins the Empire. I mean, it's a very classic like ACAB kind of thing of the kid who like thinks the police are there to help stop bullies. And so he joins the police and then realizes like this is a terrible idea. But that's his motivation. And you really believe that the Empire could convince him that that's what they're doing.
Yeah. let's talk more about their romance, especially when they come back to Jellicon the second time. Like the first time after he deserts, they meet up.
Yep.
And then have like their, I believe they have their Bam Chicka Bang Wow.
Yep.
And it's like, all right, now we're done. You go off. I have to go back to the Empire. You leave, and I will. Right. And Sienna reports that he died by suicide, I believe.
Right. This is when she gets permission to go find him because she thinks he's deserted. She knows he's deserted, yeah.
But the second time is beautiful. It is, to me, the crux of this novel, of this relationship. I cried.
Yep.
Sienna's mother, back on Jellicon, is accused of embezzlement, I think.
Yeah, she runs a mine. And the family was very proud that she'd gotten this position.
She's accused of embezzlement, and Sienna goes back to be with her family, and their people have a tradition when something happens, and this is shown at the beginning of the novel when they go to support some other family, that they put like a flag out in front of their house, and then other people in the village or tribe like can come and plant their flag next to it to say, we stand with you, we stand with your family. And it's a show of solidarity and support.
Right.
And no one comes and plants their flag, even though like they are very popular. They've been supportive of other families and should receive the same support back. But at this point, the Empire, they're so afraid of the Empire, because the Empire that's accusing everyone of embezzlement. You've stolen from the Empire. We're putting you on trial. It's going to be a show trial. You're guilty. And so no one comes to plant their flag. And she's there with her father alone in their house. And they hear someone plant a flag outside. It's so beautiful. It's Thane.
Yeah.
He's come back. He heard about her mother and he's come back, even though at this point he's like deep in the rebellion and she could like easily turn him in.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful.
And one of the things I think is most important there is that this is not a tradition for all of Jellicon. This is only for the Valley people.
It's her family's tradition.
Right. And his family very much looks down on, it's very much a kind of like rich city folk versus like, poor country folk. And they look down at it. They think that they're all hicks. They think they're all like, these are silly traditions. And part of what she sees when he does that is how much he'd been listening to her. Because one of the things that had really bothered her was that when he was trying to, he didn't understand why she would want to stay in the Empire. And she got really mad about that because she thought that what that showed was that he never really understood how important honor was to her. Like, how could he ever think she would leave the Empire? And so there's this wonderful moment of her realizing, like, no, wait, he did listen to me. He did understand me. And I think that's also part of what allows her to start thinking about him in that way, to start thinking that maybe he has a point.
Yeah, and he comes inside and speaks with her father and kind of fumbles through the traditions, but again, like shows that he has an understanding. Like, hey, I've never done this before. I believe I'm supposed to do this now. It's like, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
that was just I don't know. I can't praise Claudia Gray enough in general, but that whole scene just had me going.
It was really well done. And I think there's one other point of context that also matters so much, which is that not only is the Empire on the planet letting people know you shouldn't be standing with her, but when Sienna first hears that her mother's in this trouble and she goes to her superior officer and says, I want to go and stand with my mother, she must be, being framed. The officer's first question is like, are you saying that the Imperial Justice Officer is wrong? And he's clearly framing it as though you are making this act of treason to try and think that your mother could be right and the Empire could be wrong. And she goes there thinking that she is going to prove her superior wrong and prove everyone wrong. And eventually she comes to realize she can't stand with her mother. And her mother doesn't even want her to do so because she's in the same position that their neighbors are. She has to go back and tell her superior officer, no, I believe now that my mother was guilty, even though everyone knows that she's not. It's very clear that everyone knows she's not. But because even she is not allowed to doubt the Empire. And so I think it's just one more, like, she's feeling this huge sense of personal betrayal of, and I think it's actually during that conversation, during one of those conversations during this particular visit, when Thane says that about, you're keeping faith with them, but they haven't kept faith with you. Yeah. Because in that moment, it's very true.
I think they even probably dangle a promotion in front of her, or say like she won't get a promotion if she stands with her mother, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, I think, that or even worse consequences, demotion or something like that. Let's talk a bit about the Empire itself, because I think we also get a really interesting picture of sort of how the Empire works. And we can talk about the court scene in that, but I want to start with like the Academy, because one of the things we learn at the Imperial Academy is that the Empire really wants people to stop thinking themselves as parts of, I'm from Alderaan, I'm from Jellicon, I'm from, whatever planet, and instead start thinking themselves as citizens of the Empire. And they go so far as they at this point, Thane and Celia aren't romantic with each other, but they're still so close and so best friends that the Empire kind of tries to frame them in this way to kind of make them fight against each other. And it doesn't work at first until they kind of realize that might be the case. He believes that she doesn't, and then that's what they fight about. What do you think of like what the Empire's tactics were here and kind of what we learned about the Empire through all this?
Isn't this something that in fact modern nations in our world do? Perhaps even the United States is like this erasure of local identity. Mm-hmm. I can't think of specific examples, but I feel like I've heard this somewhere, whether it's like now or maybe like more historically, possibly. Mm-hmm. I guess it could make more sense, like Revolutionary War, like 13 colonies, that they did not want states to have like individual militias, right? And they wanted to have a unified colonial army. Right. So they had to kind of like break up state militias and mix them up and say, hey, no, you're not fighting for Carolina, you're fighting for the United States.
And I think it didn't really work, because even up to the Civil War, you had like the 3rd Massachusetts Regiment and the 4th Minnesota Regiment. But I believe today, like you get mixed and matched, and they really try to break that up. And I think like, certainly a lot of citizenship stuff is like that. Almost every cult that I know about, one of the first things that they try to get you to do is to kind of like abandon your names or things like that and to take on a new name. I think we see that a lot actually in like superhero movies and stuff like that, where you're supposed to like leave behind your former identity and become this new person. Certainly a lot of religious rituals can sometimes cause you to do that. I think it's a very tried and true method of, and sometimes I think there can be some value in helping, whether it's like just a group of friends or a nation state or even the whole world. I think like getting past some of like the sectarian line on a map differences and seeing ourselves all as kind of, global citizenry. I think there's something really great about that. I think when it becomes, we're going to erase everything and just make you all the same, and by the way, you should all be the same, just like the primary majority group, that's pretty terrible. And this here feels much more the second one, especially in the ways like she has to keep hidden the whole time that she's got this bracelet in memory of her dead sister. She was a twin, and her twin died at birth. Yes. And she has to hide, so there's all this stuff about how they have to hide anything that reminds them of their home. And I think that's where it's like, this is not being done for good reason. This is being done as part of totalitarianism. Yeah.
Big Rolaren energy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, yeah. That's a really good example.
Rolaren, of course, is she's the Bajoran officer in Star Trek The Next Generation, and initially when she comes on board, she tries to put on her Bajoran earring, and no, you can't do that. And then by the end of the first episode that establishes her character, they let her.
Yeah. Very much so. Very much so. Yes, I just thought it was fun to kind of see that side of the Empire and to see the justice system slowly become more and more corrupt, or at least be more and more open about how corrupt they are. Because clearly, I think at the time of Tarkin, at the time of, when they come to this planet, they're wanting people to voluntarily join the Empire. They want people to believe that the Empire is a good thing. And that by the time of the rebellion, all that's gone. Even a couple of years before the rebellion, we're now just in a stage of, obey or be killed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting to me because for these two characters from Jellicon, joining the Imperial Academy is like a very prestigious thing, and it's a chance to get away, to shed, even though Thane is from the upper class, it's still the upper class of Jellicon, which is like far, far off from Coruscant. So this is their chance to become worldly or galactically, and to find adventure and possibly like find employment / success within the Empire.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so interesting is how, like, the fact that they're from different worlds really matters on Jellicon, where it's very much a Romeo and Juliet story. Both of their families distrust each other and hate each other. They get to the Imperial Academy, and I think, the fact that, like, Coruscant people look down on both of them in the same way kind of helps her to realize, like, he's actually not that much higher up than me. We're all being looked down upon by these idiot snobs here. But then the fact that at the end, it is still, that it's not the money or the circumstances, but the fundamental values of their two different societies, the second wavers and the Valley people, that still divides them, because it is still so much her conception of honor and duty and vows that keeps her from making the choice that he makes.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I don't know what else to say right now, I guess. For me, go ahead.
I would say it's a great book, so we totally can wrap it up there. But if you have one more thing to go, please do it.
No, I think we've talked about it. I mean, I guess what I want to say now is, again, this novel is amazing. Read it. I'm gonna go try to read other Claudia Gray novels, but I had been putting off. I read the first novel in Aftermath by Chuck Wendig, and didn't really enjoy it. The narrative is very choppy. It jumps between a lot of different places. Yep. And it is written in, what was it, second person or something? Like, wasn't it? It's written in a weird...
It's written in present tense.
Okay, that's what it is. Yeah, which is it's a weird choice for a novel, I think.
Yeah.
So I didn't enjoy the first Aftermath book so much, but now, like, between this and some of the other ones, we have met some of these characters and some of the plot points, and now I'm like, well, maybe I need to finish that because I need to know how this fits in to all of that.
I think I would we actually did an episode on the Aftermath novels, and I think I would describe them similarly to how I describe the prequel movies a lot, which is like, I think they convey an awful lot of important information that helps you to have a better and a richer understanding of the Star Wars universe in terms of characters and events and what happened and the shape of the world. It's just not executed in a particularly well done way, from my perspective. Other people love them, and that's great. But, like, to me, it's like, you sit down with a buddy, and the buddy has a story that, like, the buddy knows the story of something that happened that you really want to know all the details of, and your friend just isn't a very good storyteller, but it's worth listening to him to, like, get all the details of the story. They're by no means my favorite book. I had to kind of make myself go back and read them. But I think also, like, knowing where a lot of who the other characters are going to be and where they wind up would make them a lot more helpful. Because, like, we learn a lot more about Wedge and in Bloodline. Yeah, like, and in Bloodline, we met Wedge's wife. How the Aftermath books tell the story of who she is and how they meet and their romance and stuff like that, and how where her son fits into all that. Not Wedge's son. Wedge comes along much later, but, like, and it gives you some interesting portraits to, what a lot of the other characters are doing at this time. I think there's great story, there's great characters, there's great plot details. I just don't think they're very well written. But,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I can agree. Like, I didn't like the narrative choice, but Chuck Wendig is like a good writer. So I think for me, it's just more like there's too much stuff. There's too many characters. There's too many plot points they're trying to tie together in just 3 novels, right?
I guess that's what I mean by bad writing. Like, to me, it was hard to keep going because, like, I would put it down for 2 days and then pick it back up. And then I'd be reading a story about something I actually hadn't read about for 2 weeks because it had happened, like, the last time we checked into those characters was 6 chapters ago.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It's like...
I mean, I think it's similar to when we talk about, like, disliking an actor's performance. Like, sometimes it's not necessarily the actor, it's the director who's doing the directing and telling them to do these things. So I'm not sure, like, I haven't read enough other Chuck Wendig novels, but my understanding is that he has quite a portfolio. So it's, like, a little surprising. And I think it has more to do with, like, this whole, like, Disney saying, all right, write 3 novels that gets us from A to B and do all of these things. It's like, that's too much.
There's certainly, that may well be true. There are certainly other Star Wars books that have the same problem of far too many plot lines. And so it may be that I did not find the writing engaging is maybe the best way to say it. But certainly also a lot of people do. A lot of people think they're their favorite Star Wars novels. So I want to honor that as well. To me, far and away my favorite Star Wars novelists, far and away my favorite Star Wars authors these days are Claudia Gray and E.K. Johnson. I think what they're writing is just so much better than most of the other stuff that's out there.
I have a final theory about what I think is wrong with Aftermath. When you say a lot of other Star Wars novels have, like, lots of plots going on, right? The Legends novels always had Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, 3PO, R2, Lando, and then, like, adds, like, 3 to 4 new characters, like Mara Jade, Talon Card, Corran Horn, Wedge Antilles, right? They can do a lot of shortcutting in terms of character development and getting to know the characters. Because it's Luke. We all know who Luke is. Like, they don't have to tell us who Luke is. So I think part of the problem in Aftermath is that they are trying to introduce too many new characters to fill in these gaps.
I think it's true.
It's just not, there's just not enough space for the plot and for the character development, and something is suffering as a result.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to put it. And like I said, they're not, I read all 3. They weren't my favorite books, but I think they're not, like, I certainly read a lot worse, both within Star Wars and without. So, but yeah. Riki, I'm so glad you suggested this book and that we got to talk about it like this. For people who want to find more of the kind of stuff you're doing, where can they find you?
Well, I have no idea anymore. In the past episodes, I've dropped a couple of places, but currently all of that is on hold. So, I don't know. Stay tuned, pay attention to a future episode of Star Wars Universe Podcast where maybe I'll have a better idea of what I'm doing on social media anymore.
Yeah, okay, that's totally legit, totally fair. Of course, this is an Ethical Panda podcast. You can find all the ways to contact us by going to theethicalpanda.com. I have 3 pieces of feedback written down that I want to talk to Riki about, but we're out of time, but we will get to those next episode, I promise. But of course, all the ways to find us, send us feedback, send us your questions, send us your thoughts. I have had a couple of people who wanted to not be on the air, but I've responded to you privately. Love those messages as well. Please keep them coming in, and sometimes you'll hear me, like, reference the ideas you mentioned, if, again, I have that permission from you. Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, all the ways you can find us. You can find that all on theethicalpanda.com. Of course, you can also support our Patreon. We're going to have a Patreon section in just a bit. For just $5 a month, you get access to ad-free videos, ad-free episodes of both this and the Superhero Ethics podcast. You get bonus Patreon content. And for now, until the strike ends, 25% of everything I get from Patreon is going to get donated directly to the Entertainers Fund that's helping to sustain people and families who are being affected by the strike with the Actors Union, the Writers Union, all the other unions and non-union folks like, the pizza delivery guys and stuff like that who are affected by these strikes. So really hope you can support the podcast. If not, though, just, share and like and let us know what you think and leave good reviews. Let people know about the episodes. And most importantly, know that we have spoken. All All right, let's go into our Patreon section. So, Riki, I've loved getting to talk to you about some of your favorite Star Wars books. What are some of your favorite, like, maybe within the genre or completely different, but for someone who's like, look, I'm watching less TV these days, I'm looking for some more stuff to read. Riki always has, like, good stuff he's talking about. What are 2 or 3 books you'd recommend to someone?
Oh, gosh.
Outside of Star Wars.
Outside of Star Wars, what have I read recently? Right now I'm reading a biography on Bobby Kennedy.
Ooh,
I cannot remember the name of it.
Uh-huh.
But that's like, just, you could read a lot of biographies. I'm just very interested in him as a human being, as a person, to learn more, because I watched a documentary on him, and I'm like, what the heck? This guy seems awesome.
Yeah.
And so far, like, reading the biography, obviously it's going to be biased, but I'm like, yeah, okay, he is awesome.
Does it mention ever that him, like, playing with his 2-year-old son and saying, wow, my son's an idiot who's going to grow up to be an anti-vaxxer?
No.
Okay.
that is another thread that I'm interested in following, or like at least reading about, like finding out like what the heck happened. The thing is, like, he RFK Jr., we'll go on this tangent. RFK Jr. is very interested in environmental politics, and like very like social justice environmental politics, like how climate change affects the poor.
Right.
So that is not too far out of line with how I feel like Bobby Kennedy would be interested in.
Right. So
you can draw these lines. Unfortunately, I think there are also lines of conspiracy theorism relating to the assassination of his father, and like believing that the CIA was involved somehow or something like that, right? So I think I'm starting to see the threads of like the intersection of those things, like the legacy of Kennedy, both as an activist and a politician, but also as a fallen, assassinated hero.
Right. Well, I can see that. And I mean, certainly we talk so much about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy's brother, John F. Kennedy, but we very rarely talk about, Sirhan Sirhan and the assassination of RFK and how that led to Hubert Humphrey getting elected and the Vietnam War continuing. And because Robert Kennedy was one of the ones who was running, to stop the Vietnam War and all that. And, it's a much more complicated situation. But
Humphrey got the Democratic nomination leading to Nixon being elected.
Right. Oh, so yeah.
Exactly. That's like super tragic from a liberal standpoint. It's like, that's what happened and you can understand like why people get sucked into conspiracies about that, because he was like poised to be this unifying figure on the left in a lot of people's opinions. Yeah. But that, like, I don't think too many people are interested in biographies. I recommended a book, I believe, to you on Twitter back when I was on that. What was it called? The Kaiju Preservation Society. Oh yeah, see, this is on my list. By John Scalzi. Scalzi, of course, has written a bunch of great sci-fi novels. Old Man's War. That's a series, like 3 or 4 novels in the Old Man's War, which are great. He also wrote Red Shirts, which is a Star Trek like parody novel. Oh, that's fun. And then Kaiju Preservation Society was maybe his most recent one, maybe not at this point, but it was the most recent one I saw, and I really enjoyed it. And when I recommended it to you, I mentioned that it's written post coronavirus, so it writes the coronavirus into the story initially. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that some writers acknowledge that this is a thing that happened. I don't know if you saw Glass Onion. Yeah, really good. That does the same thing. It's like, yes, like this is pandemic, and then like they quickly extricate themselves from that, as does this novel. But it adds a sense of realism. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I think it's kaiju. So maybe now, especially as you're watching the Gojira movies, you might want to pick this novel back up. I'm also reading a book. What is that called? Fledgling I believe is the name. Octavia Butler.
Oh, I love her stuff.
Yeah, it's a vampire novel, and I traditionally have not been a huge fan of vampire novels or like vampire fiction, I guess, in any medium. And this one, like it's I'm slow to pick up on it because of a lot of it's very sexy, and I'm not too here for like the sexiness, especially like vampire sexiness. So I'm working through it because it is well written. Like the stuff other than that is good, and I'm enjoying it. But
nice. Yeah, other stuff that I've been reading recently. Some of it I've talked about on the podcast already. I've been rereading the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett, who's I think just Rob McKenzie and I did an episode of that for Superhero Ethics. I think they're some of the best. Like they're just flat out hilariously funny, and if you want to turn your brain off, you can just read them as fun page turners. But also, there's just biting, very deep social commentary in them, which is really powerful and very worth the read. I think one of the best examples of like sneaking in social commentary in ways that's very clear, but also never feels preachy or like it's hitting you over the head with it, which is funny because it often is very much hitting you over the head with it, but it's just brilliantly done. For anybody who likes Good Omens, Terry Pratchett is the guy who wrote that in conjunction with Neil Gaiman. So those are very worthwhile. I'm rereading right now the Hunger Games novels because I'm going to be doing an episode on them with Danielle, who's been on this podcast a bunch. We're going to talk specifically about those books. And that's, I think, just been kind of a fun thing in general is I don't want to talk about all these movies and TV shows, but so many of them are based on books that are really interesting to read. So you might as well just keep looking at those. And then the last one, hold on, let me just.
The book was better.
Yeah.
Right? Classic trope.
The book was better, or you don't even have to compare the two, but like the book will often get a chance to go into far more detail in ways that I think are just really fascinating and really interesting. So I think those are the two big ones I'd recommend. And I'll say that I want to be reading more books. So also, if you want to start sending me more book recommendations and stuff like that, please do. You know how to find me, all the social medias. So, Riki, any last words from you on Lost Stars or books or kaiju or anything else?
Yes, support your local library.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I don't know about you, Matthew, but that's where I get most of my books is I just go down to the library and I check them out. And my library actually, like the email receipt it sends me for my checkouts, it tells me like, you've saved X dollars this year. I presume like they're like basing it off of like if I had bought the books. So instead of buying the books, I got them from the library and I saved X dollars. I don't know. It's a weird stat.
That I would like that. I'd also say another thing for folks can do is if you want to have the book, or if the book is going to be a little slower through library loans, sometimes they are, but you don't want to support a big, huge corporate conglomeration, the website usedbookstore.com. Basically, it's like Amazon in that you just type in the name of a book and pay some money and it'll be shipped to you. But instead of buying it like a new copy from Amazon or someone else like that, Barnes & Noble, whatever, basically it's an entire network where if a used bookstore anywhere in the country has a copy of it, they will ship it to you. And they'll tell you exactly what condition it's in. It'll often be used, so it'll be a lot cheaper. But most of them, are in just perfectly good condition. They'll tell you if there's like any marks on it or things like that. If you don't want that, that's fine. So it's a great thing. Oh, and I did remember the third book I wanted to recommend, which this one I would actually very much suggest getting as a audio novel on like Audible or something like that, because it was made to be it's basically like a 6-hour podcast, but it was then also turned into a novel, and it's The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. I've been getting very into World War II and the decision making of U.S. bomber pilots and stuff like that. And you think about it, you said the Bomber Mafia, what it sounds like is this group of people who wanted to do all like the horrible firebombing and stuff like that. It's actually the opposite. It's about a group of bomber pilots and Air Force strategy guys in the United States, both before and during World War II, who really wanted to do utter precision bombing, no civilian casualties, just attack like the most absolutely needed resources to like end a war as fast as possible. And it was because of their perceived failures that instead the Allies moved towards the really horrific civilian attacking carpet bombing that destroyed cities in Germany and in Japan, and then, of course, led to the nuclear bombing. So it's a short read. It's a short listen. The audiobook has all sorts of interviews and stuff like that placed through it. It's called The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. And Riki had a reaction, so I'll let him speak what he wanted to speak in reaction.
I chuckled because Malcolm Gladwell is an author I know well. Mm-hmm. I've read, I don't know, like 6 or so of his books. Mm-hmm. Of course, Outliers is probably... Is that the one? Or am I thinking of a different...
I think it is, yeah.
But yeah, like... Is it okay if I recommend a podcast?
Sure, go for it.
So, I would highly recommend a podcast called If Books Could Kill.
Okay.
And it is... The tagline is something about like why your favorite airport book is wrong or something like that. Mm-hmm. So like Gladwell like solidly fits into that category, right? Of airport books, like all over the shelves at those newsstands. And it's just like got a catchy like idea or title, or it's like, oh yeah, I would like to be smarter or something, or to learn more about this, while I'm standing here waiting for my flight. Mm-hmm. And this podcast is all about debunking like some of the most famous of these airport books. I don't remember if it's the first one they did, but it's the one that they kind of based the whole idea off of. Was Freakonomics.
Interesting. Okay.
And so like I like Gladwell. Like I enjoyed reading his books, but I think it's important to balance out your diet. And the two people, the journalists on this podcast, do such a good job of debunking some of these ideas in a fun way that I think it's worth consuming that as a balance.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if they've done an episode on this specific book, but now I'll definitely try to look for it. And I think Glad will be the first to say, like, he's trying to trace the history of ideas, which is very difficult to do. And there's probably some gross generalizations, and maybe his conclusions are not as accurate as they come out to be. But it's certainly an interesting perspective. And I'd like to hear a counterpoint to it. So,
yeah, good? I mean, one of the problems with these people like Gladwell, as you said, like pursuing the history of ideas, right?
Right.
It's biased. Like it's inherently biased by who he is and like who he has been and like how he has lived his life. And that's not wrong. Like we are all biased. Like you and I are biased in our conversations about Star Wars. Like
for sure.
We sure bring up atomic bombs a lot, but that's like very much like a part of who I am and how I perceive a lot of these like war stories, or like mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction stories. That's what I bring to the table, and I think it's very disingenuous for people like Gladwell to pretend like they are objective, and that's 100% like what they try to do in these novels. Like this is the truth.
So I would say, I don't know, I can't speak for any of those books. In this book, is 100% not the case. He starts out with his own history of listening to his father, who lived through the Blitz, who lived through the Blitz, the attacks on London by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, in World War II. And he talks about himself having a very specific bias and that he's trying to be aware of that. And it's part of why he wanted to do it as this audio sort of format where he's often playing for you the interviews rather than him just sort of cherry picking quotes out of them. And he's still cherry picking what parts of the interview he plays.
Okay, yeah.
But I think he is trying to, and maybe it's because one or two of his other books got ripped apart by a podcast like that. I don't know. But yeah, certainly in this, he's very clear about what his perspective is. And that's something that I really like.
Okay. That's fair enough. Like the one thing that sticks in my mind about when they did one of his novels is that there's a section about pilots and why planes crash, like why pilots crash planes, not on purpose, but what are the circumstances that lead to it? And Gladwell cites this figure of like X numbers of crashes in the past, Y years. were by South Korean pilots. Why is that? And he reaches like some ludicrous racist conclusion.
That's unfortunate.
And then the journalists of the podcast like did the research on the South Korean crashes, and they're like, well, 3 of them were shot down by missiles because North Korea.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not their fault.
And I'm pretty sure at least one was shot down by Americans. Like, but yeah,
possibly, yeah.
But they're in a very highly militarized part of the world.
A very like significant number of the quote unquote crashes were actually shot down. So,
right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, I can't speak to that about this book. I'll definitely look for that episode, but it's worth checking out. So, Riki, thank you so much for being a part of this. To all of our listeners, thank you all so much. You patrons, you're what makes this possible. We have spoken.
Stop recording.